just so you know, we're going to start our next panel now.
Hi, everyone. I think I know, or at least met everyone here. I'm Dorothea Lantz. I'm the Director of Community Engagement with PWSA USA, and I have a 6-year-old son who will be 7 next month, who is living with Prader-Willis syndrome, and he is also on the spectrum. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and let our panelists introduce themselves, and then we're going to dig into orphan cures.
I'm Dionne Stalling. I am the founder and executive director of Rare and Black. I also have 9 rare conditions and a bunch of other chronic illnesses, and I have a 45-year medical odyssey before I got diagnosed. And so I do this work for me and other rare disease and chronically ill patients, and I'm happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Kim Czubaruk, Associate Vice President of Policy with CancerCare. CancerCare is the leading national organization that provides free professional support services and information to help people manage the emotional, practical, and also financial challenges of a cancer diagnosis. Thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Kim. I'm with Kendall Square Policy Strategies, which is a consultancy of one. I'm a recovering lawyer. I used to do FDA law in a big law firm. I feel, believe me, we can talk about quality of life later. Before I was a lawyer in private practice, I was counsel to the late Senator Kennedy, to Congressman Henry Waxman of California, and to the late Senator David Pryor of Arkansas on FDA and public health issues.
Thank you so much. Well, we all know what an orphan drug is. And we all know in 1983 that the ODA was passed, and that prior to that there were, 40-something drugs to treat orphan conditions, and now there are thousands. And depending on how you look at it, most of these drugs are treating more than one indication, which is, I guess, why we're here having this conversation today. So, Dionne, I want to open it up with you because you're dealing with so many different conditions, and you've had such a long odyssey. Can you talk a little bit about what the ramifications of what passed in the Inflation Reduction Act might I can't even speak today. I'm so sorry. You guys, I had like 4 Cokes, so I'm so hopped up on caffeine. But if you could talk a little bit about what this might mean to you, and maybe a little bit of research and development.
For me, I don't honestly, for me, I don't think that it would change a whole lot, simply because most of the things that I have don't have I have primary immune deficiency, so I take immunoglobulin therapy, and that's that. But there are some things that they're using off-label for me, and that's really huge. But the people that my organization serves, there are pros and cons that you would be able to. How can I say this? That because of access, not necessarily the actual treatment, that they're having hard times with, especially in rural areas and places that they can't get to. Okay. And so right now, we're not talking about it with patients rising per se, but right now the big thing is immunoglobulin therapy. Once you're released from a hospital and you don't go home. Like I had to lie a couple of years ago and say that there was someone at my home to care for me, because if I had gone into a rehab or a nursing home, I wouldn't have been able to get my immunoglobulin therapy because they don't have it on hand, and the way that Medicare, so there's a whole other system besides private insurance. We call it CMS, the Offices of Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare, the way that they bill is in bundle billing, and the nursing homes don't. I guess this would affect me. The way that the nursing homes are getting billed by Medicare it's not enough money for them to say, I'll take you as a patient, because they won't get the medicine. And my medicine is like $42,000 a month.
Wow.
And so they're like, well, no, she needs to stay in the hospital, but the insurance company is saying, no, you need to stay there because you can't go into a nursing home. So I just said, there's somebody at home that's over 18 to be able to take care of me.
Wow.
So there's different aspects of things. I heard a lot of people here talking about private insurance, but Medicare patients, especially if you're dual eligible, which I had a question about the dual eligible piece, it's a whole different animal. And Medicare seems like it makes it more difficult, even though you have Medicare Advantages like plans like United Healthcare, Aetna, they still operate totally different.
So when I first heard about the Medicare price negotiation aspect of what was going on here, and I started to think about our PWS community specifically, and I know that I mentioned this when we spoke before. We're very fortunate right now. We have 6 potential therapies to treat PWS in the pipeline, which is absolutely amazing. But if you look at the drugs that are in our pipeline, there's a couple of those drugs which are already approved for other indications. And so when people started talking about price negotiation and the fact that orphan drugs that treat more than one indication would be eligible for price negotiation, and then that just kind of cuts research and development in half, I started looking at the companies working in our space and having those conversations and saying, hey guys, what does this mean for what you're working on for Prader-Willis syndrome? And the response I got was, well, to be frank, we're so far down at this point that it wouldn't make financial sense for us to stop what we're doing. But if we were just starting, we wouldn't go any further. And so what we started to see as of fall of 2023 was these pharmaceutical companies, and in the orphan space, these are small biotechs for the majority. We started watching them go under and then just put their drug programs, their research and development on pause. So if that's something that Kim or you, Paul, could address a little bit of what that looks like in the space you work in, I think that would be really helpful.
Sure.
I'll just start out. I don't want to overload with numbers, but I think it's important. Obviously, I represent a cancer organization, and the more we dive into this, cancer specifically has benefited tremendously from the Orphan Drug Act. People don't necessarily think of cancer when they think of rare diseases, but most cancers actually qualify as being a rare disease. And I know you all the rare disease definition, the National Cancer Institute regarding cancer specifically defines rare cancer as affecting fewer than 15 out of 100,000 people per year. And it's extremely important to understand that approximately 55% of all orphan drug designations, again, not approvals, but designations, are for oncology drugs. So this provision that would start negotiation as soon as there was a second designation is very troubling and concerning. There was a study from 2020 or so that looked at drugs from when the Orphan Drug Act started in 1983 up through 2019. And there was about 3,000 unique products specifically designed, with its own chemistry, so to speak. And out of those 3,000 products, 75% of those just had one designation, but 23% had between 2 and 5 orphan designations. I think about, I might have the numbers wrong, but about 3 or 5% had between 6 and 9. And while only 1% had more than 10 orphan drug designations, over 60% of that 1%, and I know that's a lot of figures, but over 60% of that 1% that had more than 10, and actually went up to 30 designations, were for oncology drugs or for drugs that stimulated the immune system to fight a disease, including cancer. So cancer drugs will be very much impacted in future research and really take a hard hit with this.
Yeah. Dorothea, I think putting yourself in the staffer's shoes, the folks you'll be meeting with tomorrow, they'll want to know, why is this important? Why does this matter to you as a patient or to you as an advocate? They've got, dozens of issues, wars. I think there were 15,000 bills introduced in this Congress alone, right? So we're breaking through that noise level. And I think you put your finger on it when you talk about this tension between the ODA. And by the way, you're the first group of patients that I've met who actually use the acronyms that we've been talking about. When you start using acronyms, you're basically at you're level set with the staffers. Like, they've got nothing on you in terms of something. So the ODA, I think, is this wonderful engine for innovation, right? It created 3 types of incentives, the 3-legged stool. It turned the ship around, right? So we have rare disease innovation now, which is just overwhelming for rare cancers as well. But the IRA and the Medicare drug price negotiation program, is like just stacking more weights on somebody who's trying to bench press already, and is already at a disadvantage because it's a rare disease. So when you talk about the ODA and the IRA, I think it is important to talk about what the baseline is, which is it's already hard enough to garner interest and financing for rare disease drug development. And what the IRA has done is put more weight on that. Is just putting more pressure on the markets, right? On the sponsors, on the investors, on investigators, to be able to elicit the interest and the money necessary to drive these clinical programs first. If you have one designation, that's great. And the way that the orphan drug exclusion in the IRA is written under the Medicare drug price negotiation program is, if you have one designation and one approval within the scope of that designation for one disease, you're good to go. You're excluded from price negotiations. The second you get a second designation, which is very early, right? It's before approval. It's before you've even conducted substantial human trials. The minute you start expressing interest in a second disease or condition, you're out in the woods. The dogs are on you. You're just, you're open to negotiation, and that puts this enormous chilling effect that's happening right now on the markets, on investors, on the companies that we've been seeing them making public statements. And that, I think, is incredibly impactful, which makes the meetings you're doing tomorrow and the communications that you're giving, the advocacy you're doing tomorrow, incredibly time sensitive and important.
One of the things that I have found to be extremely surprising in spending a lot of time on the Hill, and those of you who know me, see Jen and Maggie, who we're up here almost every month at this point, is how often the smaller biotechs are getting lumped in with big pharma. And before I had a son with a rare disease, and I was thinking about healthcare, and I myself am a cancer survivor twice over, so I can relate to the oncology space. But I had the perception of the big bad pharma company, and that's just not the case. And we've actually started working with a lot of the biotechs that are working in our PWS space, saying, hey guys, come with us to DC. Let's take you to some of the offices. Why don't you talk to the staffers, talk to the members, and explain to them a little bit of the difference between, your 10 or 14 employees that are working to innovate for our rare disease versus the thousands upon thousands of employees that some of these other big pharmas are working with. So I think what people don't understand is there's a reason that orphan drugs cost the amount of money that they do. And when it costs $500 million to formulate a drug, you almost can't begin to recoup any money back unless you go after a second designation. And when I think of what you guys have done in the oncology space, I think of a lot of what's going on in all the rare disease spaces. There's not a one cure, right? There's gonna be a cocktail. There's not one drug that's going to work for every single person. You have to have multiple drugs that you can form a cocktail with for all of these individuals. So, yeah.
I just wanted to point out, it's something I'm sure this community knows very well, but it takes also so much time for patients to get that accurate diagnosis. So all of these years have gone by without having an accurate diagnosis, all the mistreatments, right? People intended well, but they just didn't know enough about it. And then you add on about the limited number of people with that disease once there is an accurate diagnosis. And again, those challenges for industry to gather those patients, to get design a clinical trial that can lead, hopefully, to an effective drug, it's a massive undertaking.
And Dionne, you talked about a diagnostic odyssey of what, 40-something years?
45 years. And the problem with that is, we were talking about drugs, there's a lot of things that I cannot take because I didn't get diagnosed that cause other things. Like I can't take steroids, so because my blindness will reoccur. I went blind when I had my daughter. And so because of the central serous retinopathy, which is also a rare condition, you cannot take steroids, where there's a lot of cocktails, as you say, we need to do this, we need to do this, and usually it's that, and I can't do that. And then you're dealing with insurance companies saying, well, this is what we want her to do. We want her to take this before we'll pay for this.
Oh, step therapy.
But then the doctor says, no, she can't take this because she can't take these drugs because she has a history of pulmonary embolism. And it's like, it's so much. And that's why I said a lot of this doesn't benefit me because I'm not even taking all of the medicine that I should take because of all of the things that I got as a byproduct of not being diagnosed properly.
And we also know that so many individuals suffering with different rare diseases also metabolize medications differently. So, something that has a preservative in it might be something that they can't take because their
Right.
body has a particular reaction to it. So it's like the domino effect. So let's start talking about the solutions here and the Orphan Cures Act. Paul, I'm going to let you start.
Sure. So 15,000 bills, hearings, markups, they're looking at their Twitter feed. Hopefully they're not looking at your phone during your meeting, right? That's always a cue that you've lost them. So you just need to reach over and take their phone.
That might work out real well.
The nice thing about the Orphan Cures Act, if you look at the two acronyms, ODA, IRA, and you can talk about this tension between innovation and affordability, right? And there is a tension, naturally, we understand that. But the way that the IRA was crafted, they actually conceded that for orphan drugs for rare diseases, an exclusion was necessary, that we have to take special care with rare disease drug development. And that's why they created the exclusion. The problem is, it was written badly. It was written so narrowly that one and done. You get more than one designation early in investigations into what a drug could do for multiple diseases. You're out. You're in the negotiation wilderness. So the fix, the Orphan Cures Act, is easy. It's easy to move. It's literally like 2 pages, I think, which is like in congressional speak, incredibly brief. It's like a tweet. It's like a congressional tweet. And it is very rational. It's very well reasoned and engineered to fix the problem. So you're not going to create other problems. And I think just the bottom line for them is to know that this can be done to correct the problem we're talking about and still respect the integrity of the Medicare drug price negotiation program. We're not turning the apple cart over. We're fixing one problem with an otherwise well-intended policy and making it work properly. And not only properly, but consistent with the Orphan Drug Act, with ODA, the other acronym. So I think that's just an elegant solution. And it must be very powerful for a young staffer, because the staffers are young, not like us anymore. And they will see you as a patient come in with enormous credibility. And you mentioned, Dorothea, the innovator companies who come in. They can't speak with the credibility you have, obviously, right? Because they have a financial self-interest. So it was always wonderful for me as a staffer to meet patients and their families because they had so many important things to share about the other problems. But when they come and talk about this one problem, it tells me that it is actually particularly important that I pay attention to it, right? Of the 20 problems that we could talk about, we're actually going to talk to you about this one. And I think that's really important.
And I feel like this has pretty broad bipartisan support, and people understand that it wasn't written correctly to begin with, and the unintended consequences are falling on our population specifically. So talk about a timeline. When do we really have to fix this by before it starts to go downhill worse?
I will just say, there's hill time and then there's reality. They operate, they have something called recess in August, right?
Yeah.
So that's tells you a little bit about the mentality. As you've said, this is affecting investment decisions, drug development portfolios, companies making R&D investments. This is all happening real time right now. And it all flows downhill too, to the investigators, to the clinicians treating, to the networks and the institutions, and the patients, who may or may not have access to a new protocol right now versus in a year or 2 years or never. I think the real world effects are happening right this second. And it is incredibly important that we get these folks to understand what the problem is and how simple the solution is.
Agreed. I think something else important to remember is that whatever disease, rare, chronic disorder that you are here representing, it's also important when you're speaking with these offices to talk about how so many of these symptoms overlap, and how so much of the research and development going on in one space has the opportunity to affect and help people in another space, whether it's rare or not rare. We talk about that a lot in Prader-Willis syndrome because we're on chromosome 15, and there are multiple spectrum disorders that are on chromosome 15 where research in our space is already showing that it could help some of these other disorders. And when you're dealing with multiple indications and you're dealing with multiple cancers, I mean, it just seems like a no-brainer. So, yeah.
And Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't want to be wrong here, because this is an important thing, and I was thinking if I am correct, it's something that you all may be able to work into your conversations up on the Hill, is that with the original Orphan Drug Act, if there was another designation for another rare disease, you didn't lose all the benefits. You didn't lose exclusivity. You didn't lose any tax credits. You did not lose the benefit of not having to pay fees for the FDA. You didn't lose that. And I believe even if a drug not within the orphan space, a new disease, if it was for a new disease outside of the orphan space, you still did not lose for your those benefits for that orphan drug. So that is huge. So this really, this undoes what the benefit of the original Orphan Drug Act does. And like you're all saying, that could not have been the intent here. No. It's not that we're asking for extra or asking for favors. We're not doing that. We're really trying to make sure that all the progress we have made, and there's still so much more progress with 95% of rare diseases still not having an FDA-approved drug, but we don't want to stop or thwart that progress.
We're not even asking them to give back that 25% tax credit that they took in 2017. We should be having that conversation,
Very
but
good.
You know, they've given us a new fight.
Yeah.
I don't know, should we open it up for questions?
Sure. I just want to say one thing. I've been in DC twice a month, every month this year. And what I think that I found the most effective, because a lot of times we do see kids, as a matter of fact, I was in a congressperson's office, and the young lady, I don't know what I asked her, and she looked like she had seen a deer in headlights, and it was because she was newly graduated from college. And so what I've found is that you know where all of those cards are on the tables? I grab everybody's card, I do, and follow up with everybody that's in there and say, hey, the person that I talked to, but I CC everyone in. I was in your office last week, you know, I want to see if you had any questions about whatever we talked about. And I get a response from someone, and usually it's not the person that I actually talked to in the meetings. Because they don't, I remember Rare Disease Week, we were just, oh yeah, we talked about qualities. The guy was like, oh yeah, it's been a whole bunch of groups up here talking about that. They were here last week, and I've got, and I'm like, really? Like, we came all the way here, and you're like, yeah, I already know what you're talking about. And so I knew that you're not listening to me. You're just here, like Marshawn Lynch says, I'm only here so I won't get fined. I'm only here because this is my job. And so following up with a letter or even a card even a card will help you, because what I found is when you send a card, they send a response to you.
It's the thank you for the thank you?
Yes. So, yeah.
And just to add on to that, I think something I've experienced up on the Hill is that you may do your research on a member or something about their staffers, right? More often it is staffers, very knowledgeable, and they're the ones that share the information. So don't think this, oh, I'm getting a staffer and not the member. Staffers are all the brain work usually. Shh, don't tell the members I said that. But you don't know, even if you did research on somebody, what that person's personal experience is. So on paper, you may think this will be a challenging discussion. I'm not sure this one's going to go well. And it's a matter of you're connecting with somebody and they're going to say either I or a loved one or my friend. So don't necessarily go in thinking you know how it's going to go, because these personal connections are very real, and this is an issue that very much brings together people that have experienced that.
To that point, I often say, 1 in 10 people either have a rare disease, know somebody who has a rare disease, and so when you're speaking to that staffer, you're speaking to that member, they start to think, wow, Aunt Bertha had such and such, and my nephew has this, and they remember that they're part of this community, and it's very helpful.
Right. Absolutely. Don't discard the staffers.
Not at all.
Just a quick question. I mean, this sounds like a slam dunk. There's no harm, no foul in it. It brings benefits. So what's the resistance? What's the conflict? Why
Congress?
isn't this done already?
Yeah. So, we talked about this tension between innovation and affordability. And for those who are vested in the success of the Inflation Reduction Act, for them before the November elections to say, oh, we didn't get it quite right, is politically a very difficult thing to stand up for and own up to. After November, maybe it'll be easier, possibly in a new Congress and such. But I agree with you, there is a cost. And I think if you had CBO look at the cost of the Orphan Cures Act, they would say, okay, it's going to cost the government something. But the cost of doing something right, or to correct something that was done improperly, I think that's a cost worth taking. But I think it's a great question. And I think you can frame it for them as well. Like, you can co-sponsor this with the knowledge that, yes, it might cost some dollars for the Medicare program, possibly, but it's going to be infinitesimal against what the overall drug negotiation program is going to accomplish for CMS, for Medicare, right? And it's going to be well worth doing because of the things that you're going to tell them.
And on top of that, the CBO scoring, unfortunately, currently, it cannot take into account savings in the future by people getting the appropriate treatment in as timely a fashion as possible. So that's another thing to remember.
Exactly. I mean, I have been forced to take more expensive drugs because the one the doctor wanted to give me wasn't approved for my diagnosis. So we say, okay, just spin the dial, here's the next one, and it might be twice as much, and Medicare has to pay for it.
Right.
We could also think about that trickle down and what it means for the life of people living and the quality of life for people living with rare and chronic disorders. We could start talking about professional providers and group home situations and what that looks like when you can't get access to therapies or to treatments. What is the cost of living and housing someone suffering from a rare disease when they can no longer live with people who can care for them inside a home? So it does definitely go on and on. I'm curious to know if anybody on the panel here happens to know is there a vehicle where this language, if it wouldn't pass on its own, is there a vehicle that this language could get attached to and possibly pass?
There's always a vehicle. There's always trucks going down the road. They can always hitch a ride.
Would that be a worthwhile conversation with a staffer who seems to be engaged in the conversation?
Yeah, I wouldn't even get into the nuts and bolts tactics. I would just say, like, co-sponsorship signals that your member understands the issue and supports the correction, the solution. And then it gets down into the weeds about, like, well, when is markup next in the committee, and is it going to go to subcommittee first? That stuff is just, they can do that. Where there's a will, there's a way, for sure. So, don't be sold on the notion somehow that it's too late or it's too difficult. There's always a good way to signal your support.
I mean,
But I had a person, a staffer asked me, I can't remember what it was in February. She asked me, we were asking for, there was a rare disease, they were looking for money for an office. Oh, that's what it was. We were looking for an office, like an oversight office for a particular illness. And she said, do you know if some money is appropriated for something else? And we didn't know. And she was saying, if they have a line item, maybe we can attach this to this or ask for more money. But that was a more experienced person, and I've worked with her for years. It wasn't a junior level staffer, but she asked that, and I was like, I'll get back with you, and I had someone else follow up. So sometimes they may think if we can't do it this way, maybe we can attach it to something else, like some fantastic bill with trillions of dollars, and just put all the stuff together and just
Let it slide.
move it on through. Yeah.
We could also remind them that there are 30 million Americans roughly suffering from a rare disease. And if you equate that to household and voting households, that's quite a big voting block. Just saying.
So Dorothea, I know you talked about kind of within our PWS space that, conversations have already come up that there would be, some people who may, or some companies that may say we would not have been able to continue. Has there been any preliminary data or statistics as a whole that has been gathered that, if we don't get, this passed and, we lose, that incentive for orphan drugs to continue to be used for second, third, fourth, indications, has there been anything to show this is what we predict is going to happen, and these are the kind of the hard numbers and what's going to be the future if we don't get this passed?
I think Kim gave some great numbers on orphan designations. And historically, since 1983, the approved orphan drugs, most of them have had multiple orphan drug designations, right, for multiple different diseases. So we know from experience, if we look back on data, the data shows us that more of the drugs than not that were approved as orphan drugs had multiple designations. And this year, there's a 2024 Health Affairs article that was written by FDAers. It wasn't attributable to the agency, but they work at FDA. And they looked back at all approved orphan drugs since 1983. So the approved drugs, and they said that I think 45% of them had more than one indication approved. So for multiple drugs, multiple diseases, or for a pediatric and adult population in the same disease. So what it said is historically 45% of all orphan drugs would run afoul of the way that the exclusion is written.
Right.
So that's predictive. I mean, we can't, we have just 2 years of data maybe for now. It's surveys mostly. But the toll, the cost, I think will only be seen in retrospect, and by then it's too late, right? So I think it's better to ask them to look at the historic data of what's happened already, and to then predict this is not going to go well.
There is a one-pager handout that's in the folder that does state it's anticipated that between 2026 to 2035, it could result in a 40% reduction in approved orphan drugs.
I mean,
So that's a good stat to
tracks.
start with, and then say we don't know what we don't know.
right.
Awesome, thank you.
I just wanted to add one thing, and you all probably already know it, but just maybe keep in the back of your minds is the staff at CMS has made it clear that a legislative fix is required, that their hands are tied on the way the IRA is currently written on this. So there's no say, well, can we define designation a little differently? They've expressed the opinion that no, their hands are tied, and this does require some type of legislative fix.
Right.
Good point.
Are there any other questions? No?
Hi. This isn't necessarily a question, but just piggybacking on something you said, Dorothea. Anytime we talk about rare disease legislation, just to kind of put it in context for the staffer or the elected official, rare is kind of when we think of rare, you think of a small amount, right? And individually, our communities might be rare, but together, collectively, we're not rare, right? I think it's something like 1 in 10 Americans is impacted by rare disease. And so just reminding whoever it is that you're speaking with that, 1 in 10 of their constituents is impacted by rare disease. So this stuff matters. It's not a small portion of the population. There's lots of us.
Absolutely. Okay. Anyone else? How are we on time? We're good on time. Okay.
Any other final thoughts?
Oh, so many. No, you never asked me that question. Honestly, I think that I'd love to see so many people here. I love to see so many individuals with children. Most of you know that I usually come with my son Hunter in tow, and since we were just here a few weeks ago, I'm able to do this on my own. But kind of wrapping up everything that we've been talking about, we touched on quite a few points here in addition to what we're dealing with Orphan Cures, and that's the advocacy portion of what we're doing as an organization and as a group of people and why it's so important. Never forget why it is that we're here and how we've come together. This organization has helped shape the way that I look at patient advocacy and the way that I've worked with PWSA to help develop our advocacy program at PWSA. And the first time I ever had an opportunity to do any type of a DC fly-in was with Patients Rising when they did their first one 3 years ago, and it absolutely blew my mind. So the fact that all of us are here, we're taking the time away from our families, or bringing some family members with us, I think it's the most important part of the advocacy piece, is that we're here, that we show up, that we continue to show up. That follow-up piece is so important. And there's a few of us in this room who have been working with PWSA and our advocates who can tell you what the persistence that we have done and has worked for our community, and what that is starting to look like, and how it has shaped what PWS could look like going forward. We are months away from the possibility of having our first drug to be approved to treat PWS. And the only approved treatment for PWS was approved in 2000, and it's growth hormone. So it doesn't do anything to address the multitude of horrible symptoms of this disease. So we are up here all the time. We are meeting on Zoom all the time. They know us, they see us. They're like, oh my God, you're back. Yeah, we're back. We're not going away. It has been an amazing turnaround, and I would like to thank Terry, and I would like to thank Patients Rising for helping give our organization, PWSA, the opportunity to kind of see how it's done and show us the roadmap, because we are all stronger when we work together as patient advocates. So I had to say my piece.